Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Boiling Point podcast. This is episode 118, and making his triumphant return back to the Boiling Point podcast is our senior unexplained phenomena correspondent, the one and only. Sorry, Connor, I had to steal it from you, Uncle Mark.
Hi. Hello.
Welcome back, Uncle Mark.
Hi. Thank you. Pleasure to be on again.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. How have you been doing?
I've been doing great. I'm retired down in South Carolina, and having a good time.
Which is where you went during your hiatus from the Boiling Point podcast. You moved down to South Carolina and were getting yourself set up down there.
Yeah. So you haven't seen me for a while. So
yeah, but we're glad to have you back now, and we're going to be talking about Mars, and not just Mars, but some other things as well. If I try and explain it, I'll confuse people right off the bat. So let me just say that invite people to the storefront at our storefront, bonfire.com/store/ the Boiling Point podcast. Pick yourself up some apparel. Uncle Mark has on his the Boiling Point podcast t-shirt. I am also wearing one of the tie-dye Boiling Point podcast t-shirts. So grab any of our designs, pick something up, share it out. You can support the show that way. And please leave a comment on this episode. Share this episode out. That's what we need the most from right now, is people to share out the episodes that we have. So that would help us the most. And of course, we're going to give a shout out to Pastor Gavin. Check him out on YouTube, and just search Gavin Whitcomb Sr. on YouTube, and you can find his channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and share it out. We're trying to get him to 100 followers. He's right there on the cusp. So go follow him if you haven't yet.
Yeah.
Uncle Mark.
All right. Well,
let's. What are we talking about here tonight?
Well, today we're going to talk about the Mars-Earth wars. Did Mars cause the flood? And is Mars one of the angels of the Lord? Now, a lot of this research was done through the study of the Mars-Earth wars and the destruction of Lucifer's planet. The rest of it I got from Sumerian, Chaldean records and ancient texts. So basically, my premise is that recorded history shows relatively recent orbit changes among Venus, Earth, and Mars, and it's been within the cultural memory of numerous civilizations, numerous ancient civilizations, and we're going to go over a couple of them. In Mexico, there's a 4x8 wall that shows Mars in an orbit much different than its modern orbit. It was long and narrow rather than circular orbit it assumed in 701 BC. The original orbit went well into the asteroid belt, about 225 miles from the sun. This is where Mars destroyed the smaller planet Rahab, which was Lucifer's planet, and formed the asteroid belt. Okay. The planet was 70 million miles further out than its modern orbit now. Its long, narrow orbit brought it close to the Earth in regular, calculable time segments. They caused incredible damage depending on how close the flyby was. That's why the astrologers, the stargazers, the mages, they were given high positions in the king's court. They were given high positions in society. They were put on pedestals by these kings because they knew when this angel of doom would hit. They knew when it was coming, and they were vital to the empire's continuation. So that's why every time you read about anything in the ancient text, you always see the stargazers and the astrologers are right there by the king giving advice and stuff. They knew this stuff was coming around. They knew the calculable time periods that it happened in. So what I want to show you is what the ancients recorded. They recorded the Mars flyby so close at times that they could see both the tiny satellites, Deimos and Phobos, the two Martian satellites. So that begs the question, did Mars cause the flood of Noah in 2239 BC? Well, let's see what a couple of the ancients say about it. The Epic of Gilgamesh says Mars did it. Tablet 11 says, but Enlil is Mars, okay? But Enlil should not come near to the offering, because without reflection he brought on the deluge and consigned my people to destruction. Pretty much says Mars did it.
Yeah.
Ginsburg's Legend of the Jews. Now, this is from the Babylonian captivity. It says, the flood was produced by a union of the male waters, which were above the firmament, and the female waters, which were below, issuing from the earth. The upper waters rushed through the space left when God removed 2 stars out of the constellation Pleiades. There were other changes among the celestial spheres during the year of the flood. 2 stars out of the Pleiades. What 2 stars? What do you think that's about?
Yeah, I don't know.
2 stars out of the pyramids. It also says there was celestial spheres that changed, but it doesn't give you any. It didn't give any kind
Yes.
of account of exactly what changed and what all did, except those 2 stars out there. Well, I think one was Mars. I'm not sure what the other one's about, whether it was an ice comet or not. I believe when Mars went by Earth that there was an ice comet that it tagged with him, and that's where this water and the ice came from on Antarctica and
Oh, that's interesting.
right. They're like, well, where's all the water? It's still here. Look at the oceans. Look at, how many cities are underneath the waters and the oceans and everything. And all that stuff, all that extra water that Mars brought with it is still here. It's still,
Yeah.
Mars. The Samaritan literature, they too say Mars caused a flood. The Chaldean tablets. Did I say the Chaldean tablets? Chaldean tablets, chapter. Let's see, tablet 11, column 4 says, may the gods come to my altar. May Elu is Mars. May Elu not come to my altar, for he did not consider and had made a deluge, and my people he consigned to the deep. So we've got lots of people, lots of ancients saying Mars caused the flood, right? So we're going to see if we can figure out how.
Okay.
In the Old Testament, catastrophes are not only a repeated scenario, but they're periodic. And you can break them down periodically. 4 times in Scripture, on the night of March 20th to the 21st, involve an angel from the heavens bringing fire, earthquakes, lightning, and sudden destruction. Mars is one of the destroying angels. There's 3 of them. We're going to focus on this one today on this podcast.
On Mars tonight.
Yeah, so on Mars tonight. Now, when Mars brought this, there's a comet called Glacius. It's 600 miles in diameter. It's an icy meteorite. Okay, now if Mars had brought along one of these comets with them and it fragmented on the Roche limit, which is what it did, it was probably some 11,000 miles from Earth. Now, the ancients they had angels that they supplied to planets. Samael was the angel given to Mars. Samael was the destructive angel. He's an evil, destructive angel. Some people think that Samael was the one that possessed a serpent in the garden. I don't know. That's speculation. But Samael was an evil angel, and he was given the position of Mars. Now,
okay.
Let's see what kind of damage Mars did. Now, Psalm 18 and 2 Samuel 22, they're identical passages. And what they say is, when the earth shook and trembled, the foundations of heaven moved and shook because he was wrath. There went up a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also and came down, and darkness was under his feet. He rode upon a cherub and did fly, and he was seen upon the wings of the wind. And he made darkness pavilions around about him, dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. Through the brightness before him were coals of fire kindled. The Lord thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his voice. He sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning and discomforted them. And the channels of the sea appeared. The foundations of the world were discovered at the rebuking of the Lord, at the blast of the breath of his nostrils. That's a description of the Mars flyby. That's what happens when this thing came by. Now, let's go to some of the other ancient writers. Homer, a Greek writer in the 9th century BC, described a fiery holocaust which enveloped the Greek encampment as it was preparing to assault Troy. Homer described Ares is Mars again. That's what they call Ares. Ares as a bane of mortals. In Old English, bane meant murderer. bringer of ruin and woe. That's what destroys life. Homer, why did Homer describe such a ruinous, murderous role to the planet Mars?
Yeah, and
Hesiod.
Mars is the god of war. Like it's all of the texts seem to refer to the planet Mars with whoever their god of war is, whoever
He's
they believe
always
to be the
he's
god of
always
war or god of destruction.
he's always associated with destruction and
Yeah,
death and yes. Hesiod. Hesiod wrote in his Shield of Heracles at the end of the 8th century BC about an Ares Athena conflict and also about an Ares Hera war in the cosmos. Well, it's 480 lines long, but there's no less than 17 times Hesiod refers to Deimos and Phobos in one fashion or another as the two steeds of Ares, pulling the chariot of Ares across the cosmos. Now, Deimos and Phobos are so small that they weren't even discovered until 1877 when we finally had telescope technology, that was up to the task.
yeah,
Now, Deimos is 10 miles in diameter. Phobos is 15 miles in diameter. Yeah, he had to literally have seen these. How could Hesiod possibly have known that Mars has two tiny satellites unless he saw them circling Mars amid a flyby chaos? He described both the two black seeds circling Mars and the chaos of the flyby scene. How else would he have known it? He'd had to have seen them, as small as they are. The ancient Romans, here's the most interesting too. The ancient Romans venerated the planets, above all Mars. Okay. For Mars adoration, they set aside 2 days. One was the Tubalistrum, a day of trouble, turmoil, and tumult on March 21st. Remember these dates. The other is the Armilistrum, a day of alarm, and that was October 24th. Now, my question is, why did their Tubalistrum correlate precisely with the date of the Hebrew Passover? Why did their Armilistrum correlate with October 24th, the onset of Noah's flood? October 24th is the 17th day of the second month in the old Tishri calendar of the Near East. So Mars orbit was crossed twice by Mars, once when it was coming in or into the sun, when it went around and coming back out. So what was going on? What was so special and so fearful to the early Romans about Mars?
yeah.
Well, we're about to see. I have so much info, but I'm going to jump to things that I think are most interesting to the people listening here, and I want to look at the Exodus. The Exodus happened in 1445 BC. For the Hebrews in Egypt, the crisis hour of the flyby was during the night in the Near East. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you a timetable and we're going to go through exactly what happened, not just to Egypt, but to the rest of the planet. Okay. The timeline of the catastrophe, the Exodus catastrophe, is roughly on the following. Okay. On that famous Passover night. Isn't that interesting? They call it the Passover. Mars passed over. Anyway, for the Hebrews, it was their last night of slavery in Egypt. And in the next morning, it was Independence Day for all the Hebrews that followed Moses. In space, Mars was advancing on the Earth at a velocity of 30,000 miles an hour. All the models of the March flybys, they were always on the sunny side. They were always sunny side flybys. Mars, with its cometary tail flying across the Earth's orbit some 30 minutes ahead of the Earth. Its tail swept across Mexico and the Western Hemisphere. Within hours, it began to sweep the Eastern Hemisphere also. In Egypt, it was nighttime at the minutes of the Mars perigee. Perigee is when it's closest to the Earth. Okay, that's what perigee is. You probably knew that.
Some of our listeners might not have known that. That's okay.
So anyway, at nighttime at the minute of that perigee, estimated between 30,000 and 40,000 miles. Richter scale 15 earthquakes rattled the bold spot, the crust of the Caribbean, while Richter scale 13 and 14 earthquakes rattled the flat spot on the opposite side, including the crust of Egypt. The cosmic scenery was splendid if only one could view it from a neighboring planet. Much structural damage and collapse occurred to Egyptian buildings. The experience was frightful. As Mars rose on the east of March 21st, Moses gave the orders to get out now, now, now. They needed a head start, okay, and somehow Moses knew it. The Hebrews fled the land of Goshen, the eastern part of the Nile Delta, as fast as their livestock would allow. It was almost as if Mars was a sign to get going, high overhead in the otherwise dark hours of the night. It wasn't almost Mars was the sign. The next morning, a few regiments of well-armed Egyptian chariots and cavalry set up to recapture the fleeing vassals, who had an 8 or 10 hour head start. The Hebrews, as a group, were able to move maybe 3 to 4 miles an hour. The Egyptian chariots were a lot faster.
Oh, yeah.
But about the time of the perigee of Mars in the middle of the Egyptian night, Thera, an underwater subsurface volcano 60 miles north of Crete, went into a major league explosion and eruption. It sent ash and cinders all over the eastern Mediterranean. Next, its walls collapsing back into the Mediterranean Sea, it sent a tidal wave 600 feet high, sweeping across the nearby Alphany Island. 60 miles to the south, the Norse coast of Crete and the Minoan civilization suffered a 250-foot tidal wave, and the Minoan civilization collapsed. It never rose again. That was the end of the Minoan civilization. Gone. Some 450 miles away on the coast of the flat, low Suez Isthmus, the tidal wave had abated to a mere 75 to 100-foot surge above sea level. The pursuing Egyptian regiments with their chariots and cavalry were taking the low road and were poorly positioned to cope with this sudden waterly envelopment. Most of the charioteers were engulfed. Moses, like Noah 1,000 years earlier, somehow foresaw something like this, hence his indomitable and timely leadership. Like Noah, Moses credited to or Yahweh for the escape of the Hebrew slaves and their livestock. On the other hand, the Egyptians suffered additionally to the night's earthquakes. Egypt was downwind from Thera, so the next morning, ash from Thera fell 10 to 20 inches thick across the delta, and that didn't help matters any. The Egyptians blamed Horus, or their phoenix bird. The Greeks blamed Ares, of course, Mars. The Greeks blamed Mars and perhaps his offspring, Typhon, Perseus, Gorgon, or Medusa. The Phoenicians attributed the catastrophe to Baal and sacrificed a special offering, a dispatch of an extra big batch of screaming infants to the fiery furnace of Baal, their idea of a propitiation. What a perverse group.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's not gonna help them.
That's horrible. Anyway,
Yeah.
it was a rough night in the Near East, and it was even rougher day in the Caribbean. And I'm going to give you an approximate timeline of how this all happened.
Okay.
6 o'clock p.m., Mars was 243,000 miles distant. The sun set on March 20th, 1445 BC. The incoming Mars did not yet set sail in the west until 9 p.m. and was brighter than the moon. The moon was in full phase that night. The Hebrews prepared to celebrate a Seder and to get to hightail it out of Egypt with possessions, including their livestock. Their carts, they're getting loaded. 9 p.m. Mars is 132,000 miles distant. Mars sets on the western horizon of Egypt. Earthquakes commence with increasing intensity. The mostly submerged volcano Thera, 60 miles north of Crete, rumbles at an anomalously level. 12 o'clock a.m. is the perigee, when it was closest to Earth. Mars' center is about 35,000 to 40,000 miles from the Earth's center. Richter scale 14 and 15 earthquakes damaged the Western Hemisphere, closer to Mars. Scale 12 and 13 earthquakes devastate Egypt, occurring especially severe about midnight. Perigee for the angel of the Lord. Electrical damage as well as heavier earthquakes sweep across the Western Hemisphere. Thera erupts in a major league eruption. The wind is from the northwest, blowing towards Egypt. Tides 100 feet high sweep many parts of the Caribbean Sea and the nearby Atlantic Ocean. 12:15 a.m. Mars is at 30,600 miles and rises on Egypt's eastern horizon and is perhaps 25 times brighter than the full moon. Earthquake and electrical damage wreak havoc in Mexico and the American Southwest. Thera's volcanic crater walls collapse, creating seismic sea waves 600 feet high on nearby Anafi Island. Moses gives the order to go, putting as many miles as possible between his congregation and Egypt he deems essential. Their route is out of the low-lying Suez Isthmus toward higher ground. 3 o'clock a.m. Mars is leaving now, over 100,000 miles. Mars shine is still 20 times as bright as the moonshine. Earthquake activity is largely over in Egypt. The Hebrew people, a mixed group, moves out at about 3 miles an hour and is now 8 or 9 miles down the road to Elam. Elim. Seismic sea waves from there smashed 200 feet high across the northern coast of Crete, destroying the Minoan civilization, which I said it never rebounded, totally destroyed it. 6 o'clock a.m. Mars is at 217,000 miles. A smoky, ashy morning as ash from Thera, 10 to 20 inches thick, begins to fall across the Nile Delta. The Egyptians rise to assess the damage and to bewail the dead and find the Hebrews gone. They are now about 15 miles down the road toward the wells of Elim. Seismic sea waves 150 feet high in places begin to lash and pound the coast of Turkey and the coast of the Greek mainland. Mars is 10 times brighter than the full moon. 9 o'clock a.m. Mars is at 301,000 miles. Mars is 7 times as bright as the full moon. Pharaoh orders some regiments of cavalry and chariots to pursue the fleeing Hebrew vassals, vowing on them bloodshed and a heavier degree of slavery. Thera's seismic sea wave spreads out across the eastern Mediterranean at 50 to 60 mile an hour, lessening in depth as it broadens. The Hebrews are now weary and some 20 miles on their way to the wells of Elam as Egyptian cavalry and the charioteers begin the pursuit. 12 o'clock p.m. Mars is at 390,000 miles distant and showed a disk still somewhat larger and brighter than the moon. The Egyptian cavalry takes the low road across the Suez Isthmus. Ash and cinders from Thera blot out direct sunlight throughout the Nile Delta as volcanic ejecta compounds the recovery from the ruin and devastation across the Nile Delta. The Nile Delta got hammered. The Egyptian cavalry and charioteers are perhaps 5 miles behind the fleeing Hebrews, and a seismic sea wave crashes across the Mediterranean coast of Egypt, now only some 80 to 100 feet high, but still advancing 50 or 60 mile an hour. The Hebrews are 5 to 10 miles ahead of the Egyptian army, and many were wondering about what kind of a mess Moses was leading them. The seismic sea wave now was about 5 to 10 miles behind the pursuing Egyptian charioteers, still taking the fast low road across the isthmus. Showtime was about to begin, and the armed forces of Egypt had forgotten to bring their swimsuits. Showtime was only minutes away. Now, there's there's an Egyptian version in the Cobran Bible. There's an Egyptian version of this Exodus. And the interesting thing in the Egyptian version, I mean, he goes into detail just how hard what happened to the Egyptian people there, but he mentions that the slaves in Goshen faced no calamities. So that's an interesting read.
Yeah.
So,
Where's that timeline? The timeline that you just went over. Did you get that from, or is this something that you had put together based on your research?
That I got from that study of the Mars Earth wars and the destruction of the planet Rahab. They had us date timeline in there, and that's what I'm getting that from.
Okay.
Very cohesive and concise. But so anyway,
it's interesting. I'd be curious to know how he put that timeline, how they put that timeline together.
Computer simulation.
Put in the info. Okay,
They put the info in from the different destructions that the different cultures supplied, and using a computer generated forecast. That's how they figured how far away it was, how massive the destruction was. So there's so much in there, but I want to jump to the last flyby now.
Okay. How many flybys between the Great Flood? And now I want to ask you one more.
Every 108 years. This thing came around. This Mars flyby happened every 108 years.
Every 108 years.
March 20 to 21st or October 24th. Those were the days. And that's why the Romans designated the Tubulistrum being March 21st and the Obulistrum as October 24th. And those are the days that all this stuff happens. 108 years, March 2021, boom, there it is. Sometimes bad, sometimes horrible, sometimes not so much.
Okay.
So, I'll give you the dates as we
go. We'll go into. We are going to be doing a couple of episodes on this, so we'll hopefully get in depth on some of these things.
I wanted to go to Isaiah and Sennacherib because it's a highly interesting scenario
All right.
concerning it, and this was at the end of it. Isaiah actually saw two of these flybys. Now, Isaiah, like Hesiod, he was a reporter of the last one. Among his prediction were forecasts of high voltage, crashing cosmic lightning, discharges, gigantic killer shock waves, terrible clasts of thunder heard for thousands of miles, rocking earthquakes, rigorous volcanic eruptions, and an unsettling of the cardinal directions, hence the spin axis relocation. In other words, earth
Yeah.
tipping. Uh, Isaiah 24:19-20 says, the earth is utterly broken down. The earth is clean dissolved. The earth is moved exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard and shall removed like a summer cottage. Drunkards reel, so can the spin axis of the earth, you know? Summer cottages could be easily located with a pair of staves and some pole carriers.
Yeah.
So also the North Pole, the South Pole, and the equator were relocated. Isaiah had it right. Okay, it was somewhat of a repeat of the 756 BC catastrophe, except it was on Passover anniversary in the spring. It was at night rather than during the daytime. But his language was good for the Hebrews of his era, though it wasn't well tailored to us, to modern science. Isaiah first predicted and then reported on the next day after the final flyby as if the spin axis had shifted. Isaiah reported in a factual manner for the citizens of Jerusalem. He recorded the shadow of the Jerusalem sundial shortened 10 degrees. Someone had measured the new shadow versus the previous shadow, probably cast at noon, at the
Yeah.
zenith. Now, the story of the sundial going back 10 degrees, that was during the Mars flyby. And that's when the Earth is doing this stuff.
All right. This is interesting.
Well, let's get Shinacharab, which is a hard guy's name to pronounce.
Yeah.
Shinacharab's astrologers close to the throne advised him that the Assyrian army ought to be stationed outside Jerusalem, at least by our date of March 20th. On that night, earthquakes would test the defensive walls and perhaps shatter them, or at least damage them. And one bolt of cosmic lightning from the Assyrian Nergal, that was their god, okay? The Chaldeans called him Bel, the Greeks called him Ares. It's still Mars, it's Mars again. Uh, they said they might turn the holy city into a flaming holocaust. Thus, Sennacherib's astrologers recommended taking Jerusalem the easy way and enlisting assistance from Nergal on high. See, so they're astrologers, and they're saying, look, this thing's coming on the 20th, 21st. We need to be there and let Mars do the destruction for them. And they're assistance from Nergal on high. First, okay, if you were a fallen angel and you wanted to be a god and they called you Nergal, wouldn't you kick the crap out of them? I mean, come on, Nergal. I mean, what kind of a name is that for a god? Nergal.
Well, yeah, Urkel. That's what I was just thinking. That I was just thinking the same thing.
If I was that fallen angel, I'd probably kick the crap out of them when they said, "We're going to call you Nergal."
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress. Anyway, okay.
Yeah.
With this vast army, Sennacherib hastened onward. Okay, in accordance with the disclosures from the astrologers, who warned him that if he would fail in his object in capturing Jerusalem, if he arrived there any other than the time that day set for him, he had to be there then. The Jewish Talmud, also records a scenic and a dramatic history of that usual and pivotal night. Sennacherib wanted to capture Jerusalem either by surrender or sack. Now, he really didn't care so much about that. He wanted to go steal and rob the riches of Egypt, and Jerusalem was in the way, basically. But he was kicking the crap out of everybody. Nobody could stand against him. So King Hezekiah was anguished over Sennacherib's terms of surrender, and he asked for Isaiah's advice. Isaiah, went to the Lord and advised faith and resistance. The Lord would deliver Jerusalem. Taking Isaiah's advice, Hezekiah resisted, a chancy decision indeed in light of the record of the Syrian annihilation of cities everywhere else in the Near East. That night, March 20th, here it is, that March 21st thing again, 701 BC, Sennacherib's well-armed panzer with their ample iron armor were on schedule and on duty, camped outside the western wall of the city, some 250,000 strong. Sennacherib's terms as usual were either surrender the city and accept deportation of the entire population or suffer total annihilation, So they had one of two choices: either give up and surrender, or we're going to kill everybody. In the
Yeah.
Bible, the events of that night they're found in the book of Isaiah, chapter 38, and two other places in the Old Testament, Second
Yeah.
Kings and Second Chronicles. Further description, you can get into a greater description of the whole thing in the Talmud. There's a whole lot more in that. But
So
the
this is,
Talmud,
oh, sorry, hold on a second here, because in case there's anybody that also watching that is also, although I don't think we've released that episode yet, but I don't, with Pastor Gavin, we're doing an Old Testament survey where we're going through all of the Old Testament books. We'll do the
yeah,
New Testament too once we're done with it. But Isaiah is one of the ones we just covered, Kings and stuff, and we just talked about this battle.
yeah,
Is this the battle? This one that you're talking about? Is this the one where where their suits, their armor's made of iron, and the electricity, the lightning comes down
exactly.
and fries them
You,
in their own
you,
armor?
you got it. Yep.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So
Yeah.
okay, see, we
The
need to get we
you know,
we really got
he
to
had
get
no
you
business
and
ever
Pastor Gavin.
centralizing his iron armor in his encampment.
Yeah, we definitely got to get you and Pastor Gavin on the same
Yep.
episode one time so we can connect all these dots together because this is interesting.
Yeah.
So this happens,
That,
this discharge, Mars and stuff happens at the same time that this great battle. Now, let me
right.
ask you one more thing before you continue on, because of course, according to the Bible, and we say in the Old Testament that this is the Lord's work. The Lord is the one that's doing this.
Oh yeah.
Now, you're
That's,
saying that it's
that's his.
from
That's
you're saying
his
it's from
angel.
the planets, but you're not saying that the planets are doing this. You're still saying it's coming from the Lord.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just the planets he's using as the tool.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Uh,
Okay.
and I'll give you an example of why. Back in with Sodom and Gomorrah, when it went through there, there was a path of destruction from India on up, destroying everything in its path, totally wiping out, melting walls. And there's a little city called Zora in the middle there, right? Just a little tiny city in Zora. They kept to themselves. They found the Sodomites disgusting and wanted nothing to do with them or their civilization. They kept to themselves. When this thing got the little Zora, all of a sudden it went zoop out around them and straight out and into Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, how could a planet do that unless it's got an intelligence behind it? You
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Yeah, we're not downplaying God here. We're giving
No,
him the
no.
glory, man. He's
Yeah, that's what I wanted to point out to everybody because I could
he can
just
take
see
a
some
planet
people.
and yeah, you want to fool with him? He'll take a planet and bust your planet up, buddy.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I just because some
No,
people
these aren't
are
these aren't unmanned. God's behind everything. God controls everything.
yeah,
How else would this be coming around in regular segments like that? That in itself, you
yeah,
know. Anyway,
yeah,
yeah, the whole thing there was their iron armor. Yeah, any time the Syrian angel of the Lord Nurgle was to make a close Nurgle flyby, he should have warned them, warned his astrologers and stuff. Hey, leave your metal behind.
yeah.
You you know,
Or well, did they probably didn't know at that time that their iron was
they had
a
no,
conductor of.
they had no clue.
Yeah, so
Iron is superior in hardness to other metals, and it was important for military purposes. But as Ben Franklin discovered, iron also attracts lightning, and therefore it's an excellent material for manufacturing lightning rods.
yeah,
Yeah, the
and
arsenal of iron armor makes a better attraction than a handful of iron weapons. Even iron's magnetic properties weren't realized by either the Syrians, the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Trojans, or the Romans. It's only understood basically by modern science.
yeah,
Uh, you know, they. The other thing that was kind of odd. Now that day, the night of March 21st, the close flyby of Mars would create subcrustal tides, crustal earth shocks, volcanic upheaval, and interplanetary mega 1,000-volt electrical discharges. Mega 1,000-volt. So that was like a nuclear bomb hitting there, you know?
yeah,
Uh, the other thing is that they said that Sennacherib, part of his face was burnt, and part of his body was burnt. The other part wasn't. Uh, that's that's literally like a small atomic bomb, more or less. Now,
yeah,
uh, yeah, there was 185,000 of his men killed during that lightning flash. Here's a
Yeah.
little thing. Uh, in our era, the tidal friction with Jupiter creates a discharge from Jupiter all the way to the surface of Io, the closest moon, of 400 to 5 million amps, 2 million watts. So that's I can't even comprehend that. That's like 70 times all the entire generation that we could do on the planet. But
Yeah.
by comparison, that night Mars' electrical charge was some 27,000 to 50,000 in miles of space. The discharges were scattered broadly across the face of that whole eastern hemisphere that night. So it wasn't a big hole, but it was
Yeah.
spread all out. But that attracted away from Jerusalem's walls and into his army itself.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah. That's
and look,
that was
I mentioned Troy before. When it
yeah.
hit with Troy, it actually the mortar and walls of Troy are fused. Uh, how there's no way that I'll give you one of them. They'll say, oh, ancient alien weapons of massive, no, it was that electrical charge from these flybys that were melting walls and stone. So second Sennacherib's army was a casualty. It was much like the Greek army years earlier. And that was okay. Troy was guess what day? October 24th, 864 BC. Funniest thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, uh, anyway, the aftermath of it, the first job was to bury the dead, which was a big job. Next thing is they sent out the good news far and wide, and all these scientific types from the late 8th century and the earliest 7th century BC. They all came down to inspect the meltdown of the iron armor and the crater left at the point of discharge. There was a small raised mound left to the very center where the lightning discharged. You'll see that exact same scenario on Venus today. The exact same thing where Mars, when Mars went around the sun, it would wreak havoc on Venus too on its way back out. So,
Okay.
Mars totally, you think things were bad here. Mars just was 3 times as bad when it went by Venus.
Yeah. I
You
want to
know,
ask you about what at the time Mars is going by. Do you think, because we've talked in other previous episodes about how Mars was potentially inhabited, as was the planet that made the asteroid belt, which I'm drawing a
yes.
blank on the name of that at the
Well,
moment.
Rahab.
Rahab.
The Bible calls it Rahab. There's other names for it, but I use Rahab because that's the biblical name
Yeah.
for it. But yeah,
So
there's also not only is there pyramids and various ruins on Mars, but there's also uh, round glass deposits in silicium 24 and 2 other isotopic elements that only happen during a nuclear exchange. So Mars was nuked during the Luciferian Wars.
and do you at this time that this is happening, at least
Now, at this
specifically the
point,
event that we're talking about?
Its atmosphere was ruptured and thrown away, and Mars is already a dead continent
So
or
it's already
a dead
dead
world.
at the point that we're
I mean,
talking
as far
about
as we
right now.
know, if they're underground, that might be a different scenario, but we wouldn't know that. But
Okay.
a lot of
Of course, I mean, we are speculating about some stuff here when it comes to
right.
Mars. We don't know. We're not there on Mars, so
Yeah, it's supposition based on different accounts. That's
yeah. Not that I'm saying I think I believe you that it
it.
was inhabited. I just but the
You
timeline,
know,
I wasn't sure if this was happening. Like, are there people on Mars being like, "Oh, we're gonna pass close to Earth. We got to prepare." That'd be
yeah.
interesting.
That's speculate. There's a lot of things like Graham Hancock, Great Pyramids, 9,000 BC. Bull crap. Okay, we have no no records really that go beyond 5,000 years. To be honest with you, and most of the stuff that we know about the flood, pre-flood, and all that stuff was written a couple thousand years later, off of various epics and ancient writings. So 9,000 now. I'll tell you what. Okay, we know that Abraham was born in 1848 BC. We know that. I don't know. I'm not even going to list all the different authors and researchers that came to that exact same date. Now, we know that it says that Abraham was born 292 years after the flood. So it's pretty easy to get 2239 BC as the date of the flood. Now, uh, the Great Pyramid itself was finished, according to, now I'm going by the Chaldeans, but the Great Pyramid was finished in 2815 BC. So 10,000 years? I don't think so. You know, they need these
Yeah.
fast dates because they say, oh, well, it's billions of years old and this and that.
Yeah.
There's no written
There's no
credence to
evidence.
any of
Yeah,
that.
they have no evidence of. There's nothing.
There's nothing written that goes back beyond 5,000 BC, realistically. So
Yeah, yeah, 4 or 5 thousand.
they're all doing speculations too. That's the
Yeah, yeah.
that's
Pastor
the
Gavin and I
next
have talked
thing.
about we do one of the episodes on how old the planet is, the Earth's age,
Now,
and why it's Earth the yeah, and why its age is overestimated. Go check that out. I think it's episode 42, maybe. But go check that episode out.
we're gonna
And
go over that just a little bit here at the end, just
yeah,
enough to
and
tweak some things and maybe another cast, but
yeah,
broadcast.
oh yeah. No, I mean, like I said, we need to definitely get you and Pastor Gavin on an episode sometime too, so we can
Yeah,
try and work some of this math
sure.
out and stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to this.
Yeah, yeah, please.
Uh, okay, there's three separate situations in the Bible: Isaiah 38, 2 Kings, and 2 Chronicles, where the mortality count was recorded in that one massive memorial nocturnal blast outside of Jerusalem. 185,000 dead Assyrian troops. What was left of the scarred and scorched Assyrian army beat a hasty retreat to Nineveh. There, Sennacherib burned, and a big loser was assassinated by his own kids, his own sons. I mean, you know. Similar things happened in the years 1296, 1188, 1080, 972, 864, and 756 BC, and a half cycle later in March of 701. Catastrophes were in 108-year cycles, as if they had something to do with Jupiter as well as Mars. See, Earth is in a 12-to-1 resonance with Jupiter. Jupiter is always at the same place in the cosmos when these catastrophes hit. So Jupiter has a bearing on keeping the orbit of Mars where it is, where it was and where it is now.
Interesting.
And I think I don't know. That may be why the Indian, not American Indians, but the Indians from India worship Jupiter, because Jupiter is restraining Mars. And I don't know.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting though. It's interesting how some of this all pieces together.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I'm speculating, of course, but
Yeah, yeah, of course there's some speculation here, but I mean it's like Pastor Gavin and I, have said before, we're educated. We have critical thinking, logical thinking, and it's not hard to
exactly.
when you have
Well,
2 plus blank equals 4, it's not hard to fill in that blank.
exactly. So this isn't just stuff we're making up. There's reasons, and I mainly go with the ancients, and I like to read books from the 1800s and back, because in those books, these books today, they give opinions. They don't tell where they got them, how they come up with them, or anything. Them old
Yeah,
authors back in the 1800s, everything in that book is highlighted, where they found the info, where you can find the info. They were so much smarter and so much better research, and that's why I like to go by the ancient stuff. But what I want to do is talk a little bit about the shift in the orientation.
all right.
Well, in 701, it was concluded that Jerusalem shifted south about 4 degrees, or about 275 miles. A new equator shifted northward toward Jerusalem in that same amount. The North Pole shifted some 275 miles toward Alaska, the Yukon, British Columbia, and Seattle, putting them into somewhat more northerly climates. Europe and Asia Minor shifted southward also 4 degrees. When they built temples, it was customary that the foundation was aligned with the cardinal directions at the time they designed it, right? The foundation of the first temple, Solomon's temple, was designed about 965 BC and was built during the ensuing 15 years. Raphael Kasman quotes Kaufman, who discovered the foundation of the first temple. It's offset 6 degrees from true east of the modern era. So it's right now it's off 6 degrees from what it
Yeah, that's
was
interesting.
originally. That's how far off that this is. Well, uh,
Wow, I never thought about poles shifting or the equators
yeah,
shifting on the planets. Like
yeah.
we've talked in a bunch of episodes about about planets destroying planets and planets changing orbits and
Yeah,
some pretty heavy
it,
stuff. But I never thought
it's
about
really an age of
equators and pole
of
shifting.
catastrophes. Yeah, exactly. Well, from the data, it's known there was five flybys in the era between 965 to the final flyby of 701. There were two case flybys in 809 and 917 BC. Those seem to have been light, and their effect would have been to pull Jerusalem northerly. There were October flybys in 864 BC, coinciding with the Trojan War, and in 756 BC, coinciding with the prophetic careers of Jonah, Joel, and Amos. Josephus recorded some of the damage done to the first temple structurally during the flyby of 756 BC. And what they said was, in the meantime, a great earthquake shook the ground, and a rent was made in the temple, and the bright rays of the sun shone through it, and it fell upon the king's face. And before the city, at the place called Urag, half a mountain broke off from the rest of the west and rolled itself 4 furlongs and stood still at the east mountain till the roads, as well as the king's gardens, were spoiled by the obstruction. Knocked off a piece of a mountain and rolled it down the road. 756 seems to be middling in intensity. It wasn't quite as bad as a lot of the other ones. The flyby of October 864 coincided with the Trojan War. Incidentally, whenever it hit in October, it seemed to be cataclysmic and a lot more damaging than when it hit the March 2021.
That's interesting.
That was 864 coincided with the Trojan War, and that was a mega catastrophe. So was the 701. That was a mega catastrophe. That's one in which the two planets were within 30,000 miles of each other at the perigee. Now, the analysis of the flybys from 864, 756, 701 shifted the North Pole away from Asia Minor and Europe toward Alaska and the Yukon. Israel shifted closer to the equator with its latitude lowered. On the other hand, the flybys of March 809 and 917 BC shifted the North Pole toward Asia Minor and Europe and away from Alaska and Canada. Now, why I'm telling you this stuff basically is in the 1400s, Moses described from his Egyptian vantage point that the land of Israel was a land of milk and honey, right? But today, there's, so far as it's known, although Moses was well read, I don't think he ever saw the promised land. But anyway, it was described as milk and honey. Today, San Diego has a latitude of 32 degrees 30 minutes, much like the latitude of the climate of coastal area of that era. So if you take that 6 degrees, put it back, take that 240 miles that it went down, put it back where it was when Moses was, during Moses' time, it was indeed a land of milk and honey. It looked a whole lot like Salem, Eugene and Salem, Oregon, and the Willamette Valley. The Willamette Valley today, it's got an easterly, westerly wind system. There's abundance of rain in winter and spring. In Western Oregon, there's abundance of green grass, cattle, milk, flowers, bees, and honey. That's what, if you take that back to that point and put Israel where it was then, it was indeed a fertile land. It wasn't like it is today.
Yeah, it was more like Oregon.
Now it's too far south and too dry for dairy cattle and all that stuff. But his description of a verdant land of Israel seems to be
that's
one more indication of that spin axis shift during that catastrophic area. The snows were reported in Arabia in the book of Job too, suggests that Arabia was formerly further north than it is now. So anyway, that's there's some interesting stuff with this. Now, between 1450 and 965 BC, there's a spread of other catastrophes between the time of Moses, 1450, the building of Solomon's Temple. They occurred on October of 972 1080, 1188, 1296, and the famous long day of Joshua, 1404 BC. Others occurred in March of 1025, 1133, 1241, 1349, and of course the Exodus catastrophe, 1445. Now, if you, if I should have put them on a graph because they're all 108 years.
Yeah, yeah.
By the 1400s, that land looked a whole lot different than it does now.
Yeah.
So
we'll see if we can't put together some visuals before we do another episode, because we are going to be doing another episode. This is just Mars. There's still two other ones that we are going to talk about in reference to what we're talking about right now. We're just not going to. We're already almost an hour into it, and we've only talked about one, so we're not going to overwhelm everybody with just one. But what were you going to say about you were going to say something about the orbit of Mars before we closed out?
What?
The orbit of Mars?
What are you talking about? I'm not sure. You lost me.
Well, that's I meant
what we're basically getting at is that each time there was something that happened to the spin axis of the Earth, the spin axis, the October flybys produced opposite changes compared to the March flybys. All in all, I guess it left the ancient engineers a little bit confused when this stuff would happen, because they wouldn't know what to do. How are they going to set their buildings? So what they did, they settled on the position of the fixed stars, as with the constellations, the zodiac, in short. So we've got ordinating torques of the Earth. The spin wasn't secure. Now, the old orbit of Mars versus the new orbit of Mars.
Yeah.
The old orbit. The old orbit of Mars is the new orbit. The old orbit of Mars had a longer x-axis, a greater length. Okay. The new orbit of Mars has a longer y-axis or greater width. So the old orbit had an eccentricity of 0.561 and swept out at about 6% more space. The new orbit rounded out to an eccentricity of 0.93. The old orbit of Mars went out into the asteroid belt. The new orbit of Mars has ceased bothering either the Earth or Mars, or Earth or Venus at this point. Yeah. So after the last Mars-Venus fling, 56 days later, plus or minus one, Mars assaulted the Earth energetically, but on the wrong side to maintain the resonance that it normally did. And that was a biggie right there. It was uniquely on the outside, further from the sun. The velocity of the red planet as it began its last waltz with the Earth was approximately 80,000 miles an hour. The Earth's velocity was approximately 66,000 miles per hour. Thus, Mars lapped the Earth in space once again, but this was the last time. Now, one cause for lapping on the wrong side was that it gained significant energy from the inside flyby of Venus. It wreaked havoc on Venus. It knocked Venus closer to the sun, and eventually caused the vapor canopy that we see on Venus today. It acquired additional energy to expand its orbit. Therefore, it lapped the Earth on the outside instead of the inside. So the Mars-Venus fling was actually the trigger for that scenario, and that was back in January 24th. Till it got to us, it was in March. So the second cause was a process of unraveling resonance. Computer analysis indicates that any outside flyby of the Earth will threaten to disrupt resonance. And an energetic flyby will destroy resonance. Resonance was unraveled when Mars lapped the Earth on the wrong side. Mars had to make an sunward side flyby for the resonance to continue, and the catastrophic error was to keep going on. But it didn't do that. It went on the wrong side. This time Mars didn't. Its pattern changed, bringing it into an error.
Because of what happened. So wait a minute. If I can figure out what you just said here and make sure I understand, it hit Venus. What started the new Mars orbit from the old one was that it collided or had an exchange with Venus.
It didn't hit Venus, but it was so close that it just
it pushed it off or
it actually set it closer to the sun, and the energy push, instead of going on this side of us toward the sun, it went to the other side.
It went on the outside. So already on that one, it was no longer going the normal way. It was going to the outside.
Yes.
Okay.
Another major factor was Jupiter. Formerly, Jupiter was holding Mars in resonance. Now, out of resonance, Jupiter's gravity was a bigger factor than the Earth's gravity in forcing Mars to circulate to round out. Okay. And there's Randolphian tables, tables 10, 12, and especially table 13 that shows how this happened. I didn't, that's a whole thing in itself. But there's another player. There's three angels of the Lord. There's something called the Phoenix, and there's something that, they call it Nibiru. Let's call it Nemesis for now. But I think there was an interplanetary play with the Phoenix at the same time that this happened. That between the Phoenix, Jupiter's pull, that coming out on the wrong side of Venus, that's what put Mars into the circular orbit that it's in now, and that was the end of the catastrophic era for that.
Okay,
so
and what about the planet where the asteroid belt was, which Rahab? Did that have anything to do with the Mars orbit, or is that going to be something totally separate?
When Rahab collided with Mars, it put Mars into the long elliptical orbit that it was in, that it wreaked havoc every 108 years. That was the cause of Mars orbit.
Okay, so their collision caused the orbits of all the destruction that was happening.
Right. Mars went into its orbit when the planet Rahab was smashed into it and pulverized. And that's when it got its long elliptical orbit.
I can't wait till we get to that episode. That's going to be a fun one too.
These other conditions with the resonance, the gravity of Jupiter, and I think that other planet, between them, three things tugging it at everything, that's what put it into its circular orbit that it's in now, and it's kept in that orbit by Jupiter's gravity. So that's why I wonder if that's why the people of India worship Jupiter, was because it ceased Mars destroying everything. Now, there's both positive and negative effects for life on the surface of the Earth when this stuff would happen. On the Earth's surface, on the short run, the catastrophic damage ceased, and that was the good news, okay? But the bad news is that the dynamo of the Earth's geomagnetic field from these far Mars flybys went dead. See, the geomagnetic sheath projects life on the Earth, okay, from the surface, from shortwave radiation from the sun.
Yeah.
It's a gamma, cosmic, X. Anyway, the geomagnetic field now has a half-life of 1,350 years. In 701 BC, its strength was 1.2 Gaius. Presently, its strength is a 0.3 Gaius. It'll become 0.75 Gaius by about 4700 AD. At 0.75, we're dead. Okay. Everybody needs to understand that. So now that Mars isn't doing the flybys like that, we're not recharging our geoelectromagnetic field. It's no longer being recharged, and it's decreasing. That's anyway. That's it. Basically, 701 lapped Earth from the outside instead of the inside. Mars suffered 2 heavy flybys in 701. January 20th was the last flyby for Venus. 55 or 56 days later, there was the last Earth flyby. During the 701 flyby, the width of the minor axis increased on Mars by 19,672,000 miles as its orbit rounded out, and the major orbit was reduced by about 15 million miles. It was an increase in angular momentum that rounded out the orbit of Mars. The bright celestial piece of the inner solar system was the result. So the increase in that angular from hitting off of Venus and all was a major cause of it. Now, the minor axis increased by 16.2% and reduced the Martian year from 723.26 days down to 686.98 new days. At the same time, Earth went from 360 to 365.256 days. Earth's Yeah, that's 700. The one, not only did it, did it tilt us on its axis, but it knocked us out of our orbit
Yeah.
from 360 days to 360.256 days. Now,
Yeah.
from in 713 BC, all the cultures of the world altered their calendars from 360 to 365.25. Coincidentally, it took that long to figure out, hey man, we're not, things aren't the same
Things
anymore.
aren't adding up. Yeah.
So Earth went from to 365.256 days. Our semi-major axis did increase from 92,339,000 miles.
Ooh, Uncle Mark, we're losing you.
Am I there?
No, your screen has frozen. All right, there you're back.
Am I okay?
Yeah, start that again. I didn't hear, or you froze right as soon as you started talking about that.
Okay. Earth went from 360 to 365.256 days. The Earth's semi-major axis did increase from 92,339 miles to 92,955,000 miles, an increase of 0.668%. The ancient sources put the corrected year back to 713 when they all corrected their years. Like I say, apparently Jupiter's position contributed to the new orbit. So anyway, that's at that point it was within 16,000 miles of shattering the Roche limit, and that's what sent it to the calm elliptical orbit that it now presides in. So, in the catastrophic area, Mars flybys charged and recharged the Earth's geomagnetic field. The angular momentum shifts eventually rounded out the Martian orbit. And all this that we're talking about right now, it's indicative of a recently formed solar system. We're not dealing with billions of years stuff. This is all evidence of being recently formed. So I have something else. Let me find it quick. Now, okay, here's something else. We're talking about relatively recent our universe. Now, the sun's diameter, okay, is roughly 864,000 miles, right? Now, the sun's diameter. The sun's diameter appears to be shrinking, okay? The sun's been shrinking apparently because it's cooling. The rate of shrinking is presently 120 feet per day. This is shrinkage of 1 mile in 44 days. How do we know that? Well, the sun's diameter has been measured and recorded for the last 150 years at the Greenwich Observatory in London. So we know this is a fact. It's been going on for 150 years that we've been recording it. Now, okay, 864,000 miles times 44 comes out to 38,016,000 days. If you divide that by 365.256, you come out to 108,040 years. So what does the shrinking of the sun indicate about the past? How big, 100,000 years ago, how big was the sun? If it's been shrinking it's been shrinking 120 foot a day. How big was the sun 100,000 years ago?
Yeah.
How big was it? How big was it 3.2 billion years ago? You know what I mean? Now, in the same respect, what happens 10,000 years in the future?
Yeah.
Is it going to become a planet? Is it, that's how could this be a very ancient system if this is a fact? And we know it's a fact. They've been recording it for 150 years.
Yeah.
So that tells me that the whole solar system and everything else is relatively young, and that hence the cataclysmic stuff that we keep seeing in the ancient history and ancient records. So I thought that was rather interesting.
Yeah.
Now, do you want to talk a little bit about Abraham?
Can we save that one for the next episode?
Yeah, it has to do with the Great Pyramid and stuff. So, yeah. Do you know that the Titan Sea, where the Great Pyramid is now, Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. That was at one time that was underwater. During the period of the Epic of Gilgamesh, it was still underwater. What happened? Let me see if I can find a date.
Are we gonna save that for the next episode, or you still want this to be on this one?
Well, no, I was just going to say that
I don't mind chatting, but if we're not
yeah,
going to put this on the episode, then I'm going to close the episode out.
Basically, what we're going to, what I was showing was that the things that happened, everything from Joshua's long day, the sundial going back 10 degrees, the Exodus, uh, the Great Flood, all these things coincide with that 108-year cycle of Mars flybys. Uh, I'm not. I'm not trying to get away from God or oh, this is all natural, because there's too many incredible things that are on there. And like I said, that's only one of the angels of the Lord that's been more or less neutralized. There's two more, at least two more. There's two that I found, or maybe more. One of them is
which we're going to cover.
One of them is called the Phoenix. The other one is called Nemesis. The Phoenix comes around about every 138 years. The Nemesis, it looks like 572 years roughly, and that one stays in the solar system from what I've read there quite a while. So anyway, that's all for another podcast. But there's the ancients all told us what happened and what the cause of the flood was, and as far as the Egyptian account of the Exodus, I would have read that too, but figured we had pretty much for one broadcast at this time. But I did find it interesting that the Egyptian account was a first-hand account, and they mentioned that the slave area down in Goshen was unaffected by all the calamities. So anyway, that's it in a nutshell.
Well, we're going to do more. We're going to talk about the other two in the next episodes we have with you, Uncle Mark. So stay tuned for that. We're going to bring this episode to a close. Yep. Check out our storefronts, bonfire.com/store/the Boiling Point Podcast, and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. Give us a subscribe and leave us a comment. Until next time, I am your host, JD, with Uncle Mark, and that's the end.
Yeah. Good night.